Hi, everyone, and welcome to session 15 of the Power Pause. Whether you are joining me live this evening or watching the replay later, I am genuinely glad you are here. If you have been part of this series before, you know that the Power Pause is more than a LinkedIn Live. It's a monthly space for leaders to pause, reflect, and grow. Not through theory, not through leadership jargon, but through honest conversations about the challenges that show up in real careers, real leadership journeys, and real lives. For those of you joining for the first time, hi, I'm Smita D. Jain, an executive coach, personal empowerment life coach, author, and speaker. I work with senior leaders, CXOs, founders, and experienced professionals to help them communicate with confidence, lead with impact, and thrive in meaningful careers they genuinely enjoy. And today, we are talking about something that I believe many successful leaders experience, but very few openly discuss: the high achiever success plateau. What your next level of growth really requires. Now, before I go further, I invite you to ask questions. Share your observations, share your comments, share your questions over here. My setup does not permit me to look at your questions simultaneously while I'm speaking with you, but I will take pauses at regular intervals to take your questions. And even if I miss some questions, I will be happy to drop my answers later in comments over here. Great. Now, moving on. Most leadership conversations focus on one question: how do I get to the next level? How do I get promoted? How do I earn more? How do I build credibility? How do I become successful? But very few conversations focus on what happens after you have already achieved many of those things. What happens when the promotion arrives? When you have built the reputation? When people respect your expertise? When on paper your career looks successful? And yet, something feels still. Something feels unfinished. Something inside keeps asking questions that your achievements no longer answer. Over the years, I've noticed that some of the most confusing seasons in a leader's career are not the seasons of struggles, they are the seasons of success. Because sometimes the most confusing season of a career is not when you are struggling, it's when you are succeeding, but no longer growing the way you want. And that's what today's conversation is about. Together, we are going to explore why success plateaus happen, what silently keeps capable leaders stuck, even when they are doing well, and most importantly, what your next level of growth may actually require from you at this stage of the journey. Because sometimes growth isn't asking you to do more, it's asking you to become different. Let me share a conversation that has stayed with me. So, a few months ago, I was speaking with a senior leader, over 20 years of experience, a strong reputation, excellent compensation, leading a large team, respected by peers, trusted by his senior leadership. From the outside, he looked exactly like someone who has made it. And yet, when we began our coaching conversation, he said something that immediately caught my attention. So, what he said was, Smita, nothing is wrong. And then he paused. That's the problem, he said. I remember smiling and asking him what he meant. He said, I'm doing well. My performance is strong. My team is doing well. My organization values me. But I'm no longer excited. And then he added something that I suspect many leaders think but rarely say aloud. I almost feel guilty saying that because there are people who would love to be where I am, but something feels flat. And you know what? He didn't know it then, but this conversation wasn't unique. In fact, over the years, I've heard versions of it from leaders across industries, functions, and countries. Different words, same feeling. Because many of us grow up believing that growth has a formula. Growth means the next promotion. Growth means more compensation. Growth means a bigger team. Growth means greater responsibility. And for a long time, those things do create expansion. They challenge us, they stretch us, they energize us. But eventually, when the promotion arrives, the compensation increases, and the title gets bigger, the feeling of growth begins to fade. That's not because you have become ungrateful, it's not because you are complacent, but because the thing that once stretched you no longer does. And that's when a different set of questions began to emerge. Questions that are much quieter, questions that usually don't get discussed in leadership meetings. Questions like, am I still growing? Is this all there is? Why do I feel restless when everything seems fine? What do I actually want next? And perhaps the hardest question of all, if I know I want more, why am I hesitating? Now, when leaders reach this stage, they often tell themselves they are stuck. But I want you, or rather, I want to offer you a different perspective today. Many leaders aren't stuck, they are simply outgrowing an old version of success. And there's a difference. Being stuck implies something is broken, outgrowing suggests something is evolving. A child eventually outgrows clothes that once fit perfectly. That doesn't mean the clothes were wrong, it simply means the person has changed. The same thing happens in our careers. Sometimes the role isn't wrong, the organization isn't wrong, the success isn't wrong. You have simply grown beyond the version of yourself that those things were designed for. And that's why I believe success plateau is often misunderstood. We tend to see it as a problem, but I see it differently. A success plateau is not a failure, it's an invitation to evolve, an invitation to ask bigger questions, an invitation to discover what growth means now, not 10 years ago, not 5 years ago, but at this stage of your life and leadership journey. Now, before I go further, let me take a pause here. Do feel free to share your observations in the comments and do feel free to ask your questions. If nothing else, do drop me a thumbs up in comments if the conversation so far has resonated with you. Hi Shilpa, good to see you. Hi Rohan, any questions? Okay, awesome. So now let's spend the next few minutes to explore what your next level of growth might actually require. Now that we have established that a success plateau is not necessarily a problem to solve, but often an invitation to evolve, let's talk about what growth actually requires at this stage. And I want to start with something that surprises many leaders. So, point number one, recognize the difference between comfort, stuckness, and outgrowing. Not all plateaus are the same. In coaching conversations, I often hear people say, Smita, I feel stuck. But when we explore further, we realize they are not describing the same experience. There are actually three very different states that often get confused with one another: comfort, stuckness, and outgrowing. And understanding the difference matter. Let's start with comfort. Comfort is not a bad place to be. Sometimes in the personal development world, we make comfort sound like the enemy. I don't believe that. Once upon a time, I did believe that, but now I don't. There are phases in life when you are enjoying your work. You are learning enough. You're contributing meaningfully. Your personal life feels aligned. Your energy feels good. You don't feel restless. You don't feel trapped. You simply feel settled. And that's okay. Not every season has to be a reinvention season. But then there's stuckness. Stuckness is different. You want growth. You know you want something to change. But somehow you are waiting. Waiting for clarity, for confidence, for permission, for the perfect opportunity. You know movement is required, but movement isn't happening. And then there's the third category, the one I see most often among high achievers: outgrowing. This is the one that creates the most confusion because on the surface, everything looks fine. You are performing, you are succeeding, people respect you. The role isn't necessarily broken, but things have shifted. You can do most of the job almost on autopilot. Problems that once challenged you now feel familiar. Situations that once stretched your thinking now feel repetitive. You are succeeding, but you are no longer expanding. And that's a very different experience from being stuck. I remember working with a regional head who was exceptionally successful by every conventional measure: strong results, top ratings, great visibility, a trusted leader within the organization. And yet, during one of our coaching conversations, he said something fascinating. This is how he went: Smita, I know exactly how every week will unfold before it begins. Now, initially, that might sound like a good thing: predictability, control, experience. But that wasn't what he meant. What he was really saying was, nothing surprises me anymore. I already know how to solve most of the problems. I'm no longer being stretched. He didn't lack work, he lacked challenge. And those are very different things. So let me pause here and ask you a question. As you are listening to this conversation, where are you today? Are you comfortable? Are you stuck? Or are you outgrowing? Don't answer too quickly. Sit with it. Because the answer changes what kind of growth you need next. Now, once leaders recognize they are outgrowing a version of success, a second challenge emerges. And this one is far more subtle. The real barrier is often not external, it's internal. Which brings me to my second point, point number two, or call it insight number two. Identify the silent beliefs keeping you here. Many growth plateaus are not created by circumstances, they are created by beliefs, silent beliefs, invisible beliefs, beliefs so familiar that we rarely question them. And they sound something like, what if I lose what I have built? What if I fail publicly? What if I step into something new and I'm no longer the expert? What if people see me differently? What if I disappoint myself? At senior levels, the challenge is rarely capability. Most leaders already have capability. What they don't always have is the willingness to exchange certainty for growth. Because growth almost always asks us to leave something familiar behind. And that's uncomfortable. I remember working with a senior leader who wanted to move into a broader strategic role. Not for 6 months, not for a year, but for nearly 2 years. Every coaching session, the aspiration would come up. Every coaching session, she would tell me how energized she felt by that possibility. And yet, nothing happened. No conversations, no exploration, no action. Eventually, I asked her a simple question: what feels risky about this? After a long pause, she said, if I move into that role, I will be a beginner again. And that was the real issue. Not competence, not opportunity, identity. She had spent years becoming the expert, the trusted authority, the person with answers. And growth was asking her to become a learner again, to not know everything, to be uncomfortable, to rebuild confidence in a new arena. And that's when she realized something important. She wasn't afraid of failure. She was afraid of losing the version of herself that had been successful for so long. And I think that's true for many high achievers. We often tell ourselves we are afraid of failing, but more often, we are afraid of letting go of who we have become. Because every meaningful next level asks for a new version of us. Not a completely different person, but a different identity, a different level of courage, a different way of seeing ourselves. And that's why growth at this stage isn't primarily about strategy, it's about identity. The question is no longer, what do I need to do next? The deeper question is, who do I need to become next? And that's where we will go with the next insight. But before that, let me take a pause here and ask you, do you have any questions for me? Please feel free to share. Hi, Rohini. I have been noticing that there have been no questions from you for the last, I think, three Power Pause sessions. However, the views keep on increasing, growing further, session to session. So I wonder what is keeping you from asking you questions. Oh, is it my setup by any chance that I don't get to see the questions? But no, I don't think so. Yeah, yes, that's right. I do see your highs. So, yeah. Okay, let's move to point number three, shift from achievement identity to growth identity. Uh, this is, I believe, the heart of today's conversation. Once you have recognized that you have outgrown your current version of success, and once you have identified the beliefs that may be keeping you where you are, the next question becomes, what actually needs to change? In my experience, many high achievers unknowingly stay trapped inside what I call an achievement identity. And to be clear, there is nothing wrong with an achievement identity. In fact, it may be exactly what got you here. Achievement identity says prove yourself, deliver results, become the expert, build credibility, protect your reputation. And for years, those behaviors serve us well. But eventually, things change. The next level of growth is really about proving yourself again. It's about evolving yourself. That's where a growth identity begins. A growth identity asks different questions of you. What am I becoming? What do I need to learn? What assumptions do I need to challenge? What am I willing to risk in order to grow? And that's uncomfortable because growth often requires us to let go of certainty, to become a beginner again, to step into spaces where we are no longer the smartest person in the room, to try things that may not work immediately. And that can feel threatening when you have spent years building expertise and success. I can relate to this personally. My own professional journey has evolved through multiple chapters: corporate leadership, coaching, speaking, writing. Each chapter required me to step beyond an identity that had already served me well. Different identities, same person. Growth wasn't about abandoning who I was, it was about expanding who I could become. And I believe many leaders reach a point where this becomes the real work. Not achieving more, but becoming more. So here's a question that I would want you to reflect on. Am I spending more energy protecting my success? or investing in my growth. Because sometimes the plateau isn't happening around you, it's happening because an older identity is trying to hold on while a newer one is trying to emerge. That brings me to point number 4: create one meaningful next level move. Once you shift from an achievement identity to a growth identity, the obvious next question becomes, so, what do I do now? And this is where many leaders get stuck again because they assume the next level requires a dramatic move, a career change, a new company, a promotion, a complete reinvention. But most meaningful growth doesn't begin with a giant leap. It begins with one courageous move, one decision, one action, one step you have been postponing. Maybe it's speaking up more strategically in senior meetings, building a capability you have been putting off, taking on a stretch assignment, expanding your visibility, sharing your ideas publicly, mentoring others, exploring coaching, teaching, writing, building thought leadership. The move itself isn't the point, the willingness to move is. I remember working with a senior leader who spent nearly 18 months trying to figure out what came next. Every coaching session returned to the same question: Smita, what's my next move? He wanted certainty before acting, he wanted the entire roadmap before taking the first step. And eventually, the first move turned out to be surprisingly simple. He agreed to speak at an industry event. Just one event, one opportunity, one stage, one conversation. That single decision opened doors he could not have predicted. New visibility, new relationships, new opportunities. Not because the event itself changed his life, but because movement created momentum. And that's the lesson. Many leaders wait for clarity before they move. But in my experience, clarity rarely comes first. Movement does. You take a step, you learn, you discover, you adjust, and the next step becomes visible. So let me leave you with a reflection question here. What is one meaningful move you have been postponing because you are waiting to feel ready? Not 5 moves, not a complete reinvention, just one. Let me repeat that again. What is one meaningful move you have been postponing because you are waiting to feel ready? Your next level of growth may not require a dramatic change. It may simply require the courage to start, the courage to begin. And with that, or okay, rather before I bring our conversation today to a close, let me take a pause here and see if any of you have any questions. Hi, Umesh. Long time. Good to see you. Hi, Shweta. Any questions from anyone? Okay. I want to leave you with a few thoughts that I hope stay with you long after today's session ends. So, if you have been listening today and thinking this sounds familiar, then please know you are not alone. In fact, many of the leaders I work with arrive at this exact point, not because they are failing, not because they are lacking ambition, but because they have achieved so much that the next challenge is no longer external, it's internal. It's about growth, it's about evolution, it's about becoming. So, let me leave you with 4 key takeaways from our session today. First, success and growth are not the same thing. Success is often visible: titles, compensation, responsibilities. Recognition, yes, that's a good point, Sahil. Thank you. Growth is quieter. Growth asks different questions. Am I learning? Am I stretching? Am I becoming more of who I am capable of being? And sometimes you can be highly successful while quietly feeling undergrown. Second takeaway, your next level may require a new identity, not a new title. Many leaders assume the answer is another promotion, another role, another opportunity. Sometimes it is, but often the bigger shift is internal. A new way of thinking, a new way of leading, a new level of courage, a new willingness to be seen differently. Takeaway 3, growth begins when you stop protecting who you have been. I know that's not easy because you have worked hard to build your reputation, you have earned your credibility, you have created success. But sometimes the very identity that got you here can become the thing that keeps you here. Growth asks you to lose, or rather, growth asks us to loosen our grip on certainty, to stay curious, to remain teachable, to become beginners again in certain areas of our lives. And finally, takeaway number 4 for you today. You don't need a complete reinvention. You don't need to resign tomorrow. You don't need a dramatic career move. You don't need to have your entire future figured out. You simply need one courageous next step, one conversation, one decision, one opportunity you have been postponing, one move toward the person you are becoming. Because the next chapter of your growth will not be built all at once. It will be built one decision at a time. So, here's what I would like to invite you to do before we meet again on the second Wednesday of next month. Week 1, take an honest look at where you are. Ask yourself, am I comfortable, stuck, or outgrowing? No judgment, just awareness. In week 2, identify one belief that may be keeping you where you are. Perhaps it's, what if I fail? What if I lose what I have built? Or what if I'm no longer the expert? Name it. Because once you name it, it loses some of its power. In week 3, write down one meaningful next level move you have been postponing. Not 10, just one, and be specific about it. And in week 4, take action. Even if the step feels small, even if you don't really feel fully ready. Because movement creates clarity, not the other way around. And as you do this, notice what excites you, what scares you, what feels alive again, what is shifting inside you. I would love to hear from you. What resonated with you the most from today's conversation? Please, I am pausing here for a minute. Do let me know in your comments what resonated most from today's conversation. Again, no answer. Perhaps a better question would have been, what is one next level move you have been postponing? Feel free to share in the comments later. If not, do drop me a DM. I would be happy to know what you are thinking about this. And if you are watching the replay later, I would love to hear from you too. Now, before we wrap up, I want to share a resource that might help you continue this reflection. If this conversation today made you think about your growth, your blind spots, or the patterns that may be holding you back, I invite you to take my leadership blind spots assessment. It's a simple but powerful reflection tool that helps leaders identify what's working, what's getting in the way, and where their next level of growth may actually lie. I'll share the link in the comments right after this session. And if this conversation feels particularly relevant to where you are in your career right now, if you're navigating a plateau, considering a bigger transition, or trying to figure out what your next chapter looks like, I also invite you to book a strategy session with me. So throughout June, my strategy session bookings was closed. I was not taking on new clients. Now, from the not this week, but you will find some slots in the in my strategy session calendar on my website from next week onwards. So, yeah, take this opportunities, book a strategy session with me. Let's explore how I can help you. Sometimes one conversation can create the clarity that months of thinking cannot. I will share that link in the comments as well. Before I go, let me leave you with this. The most powerful growth seasons rarely begin with a promotion, they begin with a question. A question that quietly refuses to leave you alone. What if there's more in me than this? And perhaps the answer isn't to do more. Perhaps it's to become different. The goal of your career is not simply to become successful. The goal is to keep becoming, keep growing, keep evolving into the fullest expression of who you are capable of being. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Thank you for showing up for yourself. And until next month, keep growing, keep evolving, and keep trusting that the next version of you is already waiting to emerge. Not just outwardly, but